Every ancient battlefield was filled with the scary sound of flying spears, but many history books show Rome's famous soldiers as only using swords, somehow not using these powerful throwing weapons. Why would the world's smartest army seemingly not use what other civilizations had used successfully for thousands of years? The ground shakes as Roman soldiers march forward, shields locked tight. Arrows rain down, spears fly through the air. The Romans hold their shields up, but they can't stop all the incoming missiles. Men fall, blood stains the dirt. The enemy fighters are still far away, yet they're already winning. Why don't the Romans throw something back? This scene played out many times in Roman history. The mighty Roman army, with all its famous skill and training, seemingly caught without a way to fight back at a distance. It makes you wonder, did the Romans really not use spear throwers? Think about it. Almost every other ancient legion had weapons they could throw. The Greeks had their javelins. Celtic warriors had slim throwing spears they could hurl with deadly aim. Far across the ocean, the Aztecs used the atlatl, a special tool that made their spears fly faster and hit harder. Even simple tribal groups had throwing sticks or rocks. These weapons let fighters hurt their enemies before getting close enough for swords. We often picture Roman soldiers as men who fought only up close. We see them in our minds with their famous short swords, called gladius, stabbing in tight formations. Movies show them this way too, as a wall of shields moving forward, only fighting when an enemy gets within arm's reach. This idea that Romans only fought face to face has stuck around for a long time, but this picture doesn't make sense when you really think about it. The Romans were master builders. They made huge bridges, roads that still exist today, and machines that could throw rocks the size of a man's head. They were smart planners who changed their ways of fighting to beat different enemies. They took good ideas from the people they conquered and made them better. So why would such clever fighters skip using thrown weapons? Why would they give up the huge advantage of hitting enemies from far away? Did they really march into battle with no answer to enemy archers and spear throwers? Some history books say yes. They tell us Romans only used swords and pushing tactics. They say Romans didn't throw spears like other armies did. But something about this story doesn't add up. The Romans conquered lands from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Iraq. They beat armies with all kinds of weapons and tactics. They ruled the ancient world for hundreds of years. Could they really have done all that while ignoring such a basic and useful weapon as the thrown spear? The truth is both more complex and more interesting than what most people think. Roman armies did have answers to the problem of distance fighting, and those answers tell us a lot about how smart, practical, and deadly effective Roman soldiers really were. While many ancient armies had soldiers whose main job was throwing spears, the Romans took a different path. They didn't have special units of spear throwers like other armies did. Instead, every Roman soldier carried a unique weapon called the pilum. It wasn't just a spear, but something much more clever. Imagine a wooden handle about 4 feet long, topped with a thin iron rod that ended in a small, sharp pyramid point. The whole thing weighed about 2 pounds, heavy enough to smash through shields, but still light enough to throw before switching to a sword. When a Roman soldier held his pilum, he felt the strange balance in his hand. Most of the weight sat at the front, making it harder to throw far, but giving it crushing power when it hit. A trained legionary could throw it about 50 feet, not as far as some other armies' javelins, but far enough to hit enemies before they got too close. Every Roman carried 1 or 2 of these, not as their main weapon, but as part of their complete fighting gear. The most clever part was what happened after the pilum hit something. The long iron shaft was made of soft metal that bent on impact. This simple trick meant enemies couldn't throw the weapons back. Imagine being a tribal warrior, pulling a Roman pilum from your shield, ready to throw it back, only to find it now droops uselessly in your hands. We know Romans really used these weapons because we've found thousands of them buried in old battlefields. At a place called Alesia in France, where Julius Caesar won a big battle, diggers found pila, that's more than 1 pilum, still stuck in the ground where they landed almost 2,000 years ago. Later in Roman history, they made an even smaller throwing weapon called the plumbata. These were like heavy darts with lead weights. Roman soldiers could carry several of these tucked into their shields. The lead weight made them fly far and hit hard. Even though they were small, a soldier could throw 5 or 6 before an enemy got close enough for sword fighting. Roman soldiers practiced throwing as part of their training, but not as much as they practiced sword fighting. The training teacher would set up a wooden post, and new soldiers had to hit it from different distances. They didn't train to be expert javelin troops like some other armies had, but to use these throws to break up enemy lines before closing in with swords. This shows how practical Roman army planners were. They didn't create special units of spear throwers like other armies did. Instead, they gave every soldier a throwing weapon that worked alongside their main fighting style. The real power of Roman throwing weapons showed up in big battles. At the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, Roman soldiers faced the feared Macedonian phalanx. The Macedonians had 20-foot spears pointing out from their tight lines. They looked unbeatable. But when the Romans got close, they all threw their pila at once. Thousands of heavy spears rained down. The Macedonian shields were pinned together or weighed down by bent pila. Their perfect lines broke apart. The Romans then rushed in with swords and won a fight that had seemed impossible. As Rome grew from a republic into a huge empire, their throwing weapons changed too. Early pila were heavier, meant to smash through shields. Later versions got lighter so soldiers could throw them farther. By the time Rome fought in Britain and Germany, they had several kinds of throwing weapons for different jobs. Rome's enemies learned to fear these weapons. German tribal warriors would try to dodge the thrown pila by spreading out their lines, but this made them weaker against Roman sword attacks. Some enemies tried using lighter shields that were easier to move, hoping to knock away the flying spears. But lighter shields didn't protect as well against Roman swords. No matter what they tried, enemies found themselves in a trap, either get hit by the pila or be weak against what came next. The throwing weapons worked perfectly with Roman shield tactics. Roman soldiers would march forward in a tight line, shields locked together. When they got close to the enemy, the front row would stop. The second row would throw their pila over the heads of the first row, then the third row would throw theirs. Finally, the front row would throw and immediately pull out their swords to charge. The enemy would be hit by 3 waves of spears in just a few seconds, then face a wall of swords and shields before they could recover. These throwing spears worked best against certain enemies. They were deadly against troops with big shields, like the Celts, because the pila would stick in the shields and make them too heavy to use. Against cavalry, the Romans would throw at the horses, who would panic and throw off their riders. Even when fighting other armies with armor, the sharp, narrow points of the pila could sometimes punch through metal chest plates. Maybe the scariest part was the sound. Imagine standing in an enemy line and hearing the shout of thousands of Romans. Then a whooshing noise fills the air as dark shapes fly toward you, the crash of iron hitting shields, the screams of men hit by the spears, the sudden weight of your shield as a pilum sticks in it. All this happened before you even got to fight a Roman face-to-face. Many enemies broke and ran just from this first attack, their courage gone before the real fighting even started. The clever ideas behind Roman throwing spears didn't die with their empire. In the Middle Ages, soldiers used weapons called angons that copied the bent shaft trick of the pilum. Knights in shining armor threw short spears from horseback before charging in with lances. Even into the time of castles and kings, the lessons Rome taught about throwing weapons before closing to fight stayed important. Today's soldiers still use the same basic idea. Modern armies throw grenades before moving in. Special forces troops use small rocket launchers that, like the pilum, are meant to be used once and left behind. The Marines and Army still train soldiers to throw things accurately before using their main weapons. The Roman way of fighting, soften the enemy up from a distance, then move in close, is still how battles work today. So why do so many people think Romans didn't use throwing spears? Part of the reason is movies and TV shows. They usually show Romans only fighting with swords because sword fights look more exciting on screen. Throwing spears wouldn't make for a very long or interesting fight scene. Books and games often do the same thing, focusing on the clash of swords rather than the throwing of spears. Another reason is that when people find Roman weapons, the iron parts of pila are often so rusted and bent that they don't look like weapons anymore. The wooden parts rotted away long ago. So in museum displays, you're much more likely to see well-preserved swords and daggers than the remains of throwing spears. Many history books also focus more on how Romans fought in formation than on the weapons they used. They talk about the famous turtle shield formation and other tactics, without mentioning that these formations included carefully planned throwing attacks too. This makes us wonder, how much did these throwing weapons help Rome rule the ancient world? Without their pila and other throwing weapons, would Roman armies still have won so many battles? Would they have conquered so much land? Would they have ruled for so many years? The pilum and other throwing weapons gave Rome an edge that other armies didn't have, a perfect mix of distance fighting and close combat in each soldier. The story of Roman throwing spears teaches us something important. Winning armies use every good idea they can find. The Romans weren't too proud to throw things before fighting hand-to-hand. They used every trick and tool that worked. Maybe that's the real lesson we should remember about Rome. They didn't just win with courage or training or fancy equipment. They won because they were practical and smart enough to use whatever worked best. What other clever weapons or tactics do you think history has forgotten about? What other army tricks might we be missing when we think about ancient battles? Leave your ideas in the comments below. And if you enjoyed learning about how the Romans really used throwing weapons, hit that subscribe button to learn more forgotten facts about the ancient world.